The Order of the Sith Lords, or simply the Sith, are the primary antagonists of the Star Wars franchise. Drawing their strength from the dark side of the Force, the Sith have influenced nearly every major era of Star Wars storytelling since their debut in 1977, with their in-universe legacy stretching back over 7,000 years. While every age has produced its share of legendary Dark Lords, certain incarnations have undoubtedly achieved greater success than others. In today's video, we will be ranking the mainline members of Darth Krayt's One Sith Order from weakest to strongest in order to determine which Dark Lords reign supreme. Content for this list will be drawn exclusively from the Legends continuity, along with creator statements that do not significantly contradict established lore. Prime Lomi Plo will be included here, despite her association with the One Sith being an obvious retcon, and Darth Red will also qualify since he remained a firm adherent of the dark side, despite his eventual rebellion against the faction. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Starting in G tier, we have the basic One Sith Apprentices and One Sith Adepts. Like many Sith empires before them, Krayt's Order followed a strict hierarchy system through which members could advance if they proved themselves worthy. Apprentices were the rank below the Adepts and could earn their iconic red and black tattoos by completing various trials. Since ritual combat is stated to be one of these trials, it's reasonable to assume that unmarked One Sith were generally weaker than their tattooed counterparts, though a few notable exceptions will appear later on this list. In terms of combative portrayal, the average One Sith Adept was typically a match for the average New Jedi Order Jedi or Imperial Knight. This is a pretty impressive benchmark given the numerous statements of New Order Jedi being stronger than the old. While they did sort of become fodder to showcase the growth of the main characters by the end of the comic, that's hardly unique to Legacy, and it's not as though they ever devolved into KOTOR Acolyte territory. Next in F tier, we have Yul Ison and Sarai, who, despite being unmarked, have various statements and feats placing them above the average One Sith Adept. Yul Ison was a high-ranking Sith scientist with a strong predilection for biotechnology and ancient darkside lore. While he openly admitted that lightsaber combat was not his specialty, Ison still managed to parry several strikes from Volume 10 Cade Skywalker, and even knock him back with a telekinetic surge on Utapau. Cade quickly recovered and slew Yul in one of the most epic freefall sequences in the franchise, but the encounter still speaks well of Yul given that Cade has defeated fully marked Sith with less difficulty. As expected of a Sith scientist, Ison's greatest weapon was his intellect. He could adapt leviathans for undersea use, and brew toxins potent enough to life-wipe entire planets within days. While these attributes could arguably warrant a higher ranking if prep time is taken into account, his biotech skills still fall short of Maladi's, and his direct combat showings, though impressive, are not significantly above the standard in the grand scheme of things. Sarai was the daughter of Darth Weirlock III, with it being stated on multiple occasions that her potential was sufficient to eventually succeed her father as regent. Her only significant combat showing was her confrontation with Darth Strife within the Sith Temple. The two engaged in a brief but intense exchange of physical combat and force abilities, with Sarai horrifically contorting the hand's body with telekinesis before her father intervened. A very impressive feat for the apprentice, but also one with a lot of context. Strife had just emerged from intensive Bacta treatment and lacked both his armor and lightsaber, so it would be pretty disingenuous to claim he was anywhere near full strength. It also doesn't help Sarai's case that, even in this weakened state, Strife reacted to nearly all of her attacks and blatantly overpowered her attempt to crush his heart with the Force. Don't get me wrong, this low HP Strife is still a monstrous fighter, and Sarai's ability to hurt him at all is more than enough evidence to place her above Yul Ison, especially considering healthy Strife's performance against Cade. Before we proceed, I will be going over where I think Sarai could rank at her full potential when it becomes relevant, despite all of us already knowing exactly where that is. In E tier, we have Darth Luft, the unnamed Snivian, Darth Red, and Red's unnamed Sith Master. If G and F tier represented the average and slightly above average One Sith, then I would say E tier represents the One Sith mid-tiers, being strong combatants who can easily deal with fodder, but are still far removed from the truly formidable Darksiders. Starting with Darth Luft, we don't know a ton about this guy. However, he was able to dismantle 2 cadet Imperial Knights with ease, and was winning against NJO Assam throughout the majority of their duel, only losing after being distracted by the aforementioned cadets. Despite their differing views on the Force, Imperial Knights are stated to be just as capable fighters as the Legacy-era Jedi, and are counted amongst the most talented and dangerous Force users in the galaxy. Assam was a fully fledged Imperial Knight, which at minimum scales him to that of a Jedi Knight, though his portrayal does imply an above-average potential. This further reinforces the notion of Luft as an exceptional Sith, since he was beating NJO at almost every turn. During his introduction, Darth Luft claimed he would kill Darth Red if they ever crossed paths. However, I don't see this statement as enough to justify ranking Luft above Red, since Red has a lot more lore backing him up, and he performed better against NJO in the previous volume. Both Sith defeated the Knight, but where Luft needed to gradually beat NJO down, Red dispatched him almost immediately. Some may cite NJO scarring Red as a refutation to this, but their dialogue strongly suggests that he had underestimated the Imperials' capabilities, and Red literally one-shots NJO with thrown spikes right after. All that being said, Red still considered Darth Luft a legitimate threat to his plans, which confirms that he took his strength seriously, hence why they're ranked on the same tier. Next, we have the unnamed Snivian. Again, we don't know much about this guy, but he was able to react and respond to a surprise attack from Darth Red, even having the upper hand on the defected Sith at points in their fight before being killed. This segues nicely into Darth Red himself, the primary antagonist of Legacy Volume 2. He is referred to as a Sith warrior, a class of Darksiders renowned for their martial prowess, which is fitting given that his insurgency was all about hunting other Sith and disrupting the stability of the wider galaxy. Feat-wise, Red was strong enough to carve through hordes of One Sith adepts and defeated NJO Assam more decisively than Darth Luft once he got serious. While he did ultimately lose to NJO at the end of the series, we mustn't forget that Red was actively trying to die in order to eradicate the Sith Order's remaining remnants, with NJO himself being heavily implied to have been amped by the dark side at the time. Darth Red's best showing was his battle with Yulta Val, which, while inconclusive, was anything but one-sided. For reference, Yulta was a master-level Imperial Knight who was referred to by Empress Fel as one of her finest, making Red's ability to go toe-to-toe with him a feat worthy of a series villain. However, even with all of that taken into account, Red still admitted that he could not have matched his unnamed Sith Master in strength, hence why he opted to stab him in the back while he was distracted rather than face him head-on. This scaling is supported by the fact that Red's master outright defeated Yulta Val, whereas Red could only go toe-to-toe with him. There is a precedent for Sith apprentices receiving a power boost after killing their masters, but there's no explicit evidence that this occurred with Red, and even if it did, it clearly wasn't enough to push him beyond his master's level, given their respective performances against Val. Next in D tier, we start to get into the more elite territory with Darth Cruel, Darth Malaval, Darth Azard, and Darth Havoc. Now, I initially had Cruel ranked lower in my pre-notes until I took a fresh examination of his lore and realized that he's weirdly powerful for such an obscure character. Darth Krul was a Sith assassin tasked by Malady and Crate to infiltrate the world of Bastion and assassinate Emperor Roan Fel. While the mission ultimately failed, Krul was able to throw hands with the Emperor for a decent period of time and even pushed him back with Force lightning. Fel may not have been the strongest Imperial Knight, but he was definitely in the upper tier of his order, with Crate himself implying that Fel could have put up at least some resistance against him in Volume 1. Malady does note that Krul losing to Fel was the most likely outcome, but the fact that she and Crate believed he had any chance of success, combined with his actual fight performance, is testament to the assassin's overall capabilities. Darth Malaval is next on this tier, who, despite never being shown fighting another Force user, is stated by his character sheet to be one of the most capable Jedi hunters in Crate's empire. He also wields a shock whip in tandem with his lightsaber, a weapon similar to the light whip, which is notoriously difficult to defend against. However, he was kinda gunned down by a stormtrooper while he was busy torturing another, which isn't the best look for someone with his credentials. Darth Azard was another Quarren Sith, albeit one with a far cooler weapon and actual feats against other Force users. He is stated to be a competent military commander, a master of the double-bladed lightsaber, and a devoted follower of Darth Vader's philosophies. Following Crate's genocidal declaration of Mon Calamari, Azard dueled Imperial Master Treyas Sinde within a hangar bay. The fight ended prematurely due to an explosion, however, Azard was consistently portrayed as the more dominant fighter, and even told Sinde outright that he could not defeat him, a claim that the Imperial never disputes. While it is debatable whether or not Sinde was still in his fighting prime during the events of Legacy, he was still a highly respected Imperial Master, who was strong enough to make Roan Fel sweat in a sparring match. Said Emperor even implied that Sinde had the potential to be the leader of the Imperial Knights, which is pretty high praise and further highlights the caliber of opponent the Quarren was facing. Darth Azard would later battle Wolf Sazin at the climax of Volume 10. Most of this duel occurred off-panel, however, neither combatant fell quickly, with Azard's death occurring only after he became distracted by sensing Crate's newly acquired powers. To say that this is impressive would be an understatement given that Sazin had firmly established himself as a hand-tier combatant by that stage in the comic. Darth Havoc was the former master of Antares Draco, who fell to the dark side after abandoning his vows to the Imperial Knights, becoming far stronger as a Sith than he had ever been in his service to the Fel dynasty. While the details of their initial confrontation remain vague, Havoc murdered Empress Alaya Fel and survived a battle with Antares prior to the events of the comic. Pretty impressive considering that Draco would later become the strongest Imperial Knight of his era, with him being genuinely baffled by the news of his old teacher's survival. Darth Havoc would eventually rise to the rank of Sith Inquisitor, a class of Darksider that specialized in Force powers, with the Itachi demonstrating the ability to conjure illusions powerful enough to deceive trained adepts. Quite a feat given that all Force sensitives possess some degree of passive psychic resistance. During the events of Volume 10, Havoc confronted Antares within the Sith Temple after he had rescued Marasiah Fel. Much like Azard v Wolf, we only see the beginning and ending of this bout. However, again, neither combatant fell quickly, with the Inquisitor ultimately KOing Draco with a blast of lightning. Draco was undoubtedly fatigued by the horde of Sith adepts he had to carve through before facing Havoc, but it's still an impressive showing given peak Draco's scaling. Finally, Darth Havoc appears to have been elevated to a position of significant authority within the One Sith by Darth Nihil in the wake of Crate's death. While this could be used as evidence for Havoc being ranked higher, he needs more lore and feats to place him there confidently. In C tier, we have the Sith Troopers and Darth Malady. The Sith Troopers were a secret faction of Darksiders created by Darth Crate in the decades leading up to Legacy. Each member was taken shortly after birth and augmented with the highest grade cybernetic implants, becoming pure extensions of the Emperor's mind, as well as his ultimate contingency. While their strength would obviously vary from trooper to trooper, Crate states that only Force sensitives with exceptional potential were recruited into the program, which is why I'm grouping them together into the same tier. In terms of portrayal, the Sith troopers could tear through mid-tier Sith, Imperial Knights, and Jedi with relative ease, with only high master-level combatants or stronger standing a chance against them. Among their more notable victims were Tay Corso, Sayar Dun La, and Drock, who had previously been part of a Jedi team that included Asak Dan. Dan showed superiority to Treya Sinde, which should scale him similarly to Darth Azard. While Asak may have been the strongest member of his team, it's never confirmed, with John Ostrander even implying a degree of relativity among the Jedi, given that they were originally slated to accompany Cade on his mission to assassinate Crate. All that said, the Sith Troopers' greatest strength, their mental connection to Crate, was also their greatest weakness. Not only did they lack true independence, but they also descended into madness once that connection had been severed with their master's death. Darth Malady was the daughter of an unnamed Deveronian Jedi who was personally recruited by Darth Crate after he murdered her parents. As one does. While I do believe she would get overwhelmed by a group of Sith troopers, her individual feats and accolades are superior to theirs, even if only by a narrow margin. Malady was the head of Intelligence and Assassination, as well as the Order's foremost healer, an impressive accolade given the dark side's innate weaknesses in that field. Her greatest talents lied in Sith alchemy and biotechnology, similar to Yul Eisen, but far more advanced. Not only was she the one responsible for sabotaging the Osis project, but she was able to create more complex life-wiping toxins than Eisen in a comparable time frame, while still recovering from the mental damage inflicted on her by Cade Skywalker. These skills make Malady all the more dangerous if prep time is factored in, since she did come closer than most to defeating Cade when she lured him into her lair on Wayland. Prep time Malady would run circles around prep time Eisen, go full jigsaw on a squad of Sith troopers, and debatably leapfrog B tier into A tier depending on the resources available to her. Force-wise, Darth Malady was powerful enough to hurt Volume 9 Cade Skywalker with Sith lightning, and project horrifying illusions directly into his mind. Cade was able to resist the assault and break her brain in retaliation, but I don't see this as an anti-feat for Malady, since Cade's capacity to resist mental interference is potentially in the top 10 of the franchise. During the Battle of Had Abaddon, Darth Malady clashed with Shadow Veo with sabers and force powers alike. Once again, only the barest fragments of this duel are shown on panel, but both fighters were depicted reacting to each other's attacks, and neither appeared to be horribly injured when they were interrupted by Rakaghuls. Even if we assume that Malady's bout with Shadow only lasted a couple of minutes, the fact that she wasn't instantly obliterated says a great deal about her strength, given that Shadow is a hand-tier combatant with the ability to defeat Sith troopers. That being said, Malady herself admitted that she needed Niall's help to overthrow Weirlock, showing that while she could hang with the upper echelons, she wasn't on their level overall. In B tier, we have the Emperor's Hands, Darth Strife, Darth Talon, and Darth Nihil. As noted by multiple sources, Hands were the third highest tier of the One Sith, acting as direct extensions of Crate's will, and reporting exclusively to him. Not only did they outrank every other Sith in the Order save the Regents and the Emperor himself, but their title was bestowed upon them specifically due to their immense strength, meaning that being above C tier is literally a requirement for the position. Darth Strife was immediately chosen by Crate to replace Nihil as a hand after the Nagi failed to defeat Cade Skywalker in Volume 3, highlighting the Emperor's confidence in his abilities. Despite often playing the role of the Order's brute enforcer, Strife was a terrifying combatant, being described in Issue 0 as perhaps the most brutal of Krait's followers, and a personification of raw power. He did get a little bent out of shape by Sarai, but as I mentioned earlier, this was a weakened Strife who still gave the apprentice significant resistance. During the Battle of Had Abaddon, Strife clashed with Cade Skywalker and held his own decently well despite losing. One could even argue that their fight would have gone on longer had Cade not force-kicked the hand into the explosives Cyan had prepared. Darth Strife would later battle Wolf Sazin at the climax of the War Arc, which ended with the two killing each other. Despite the loss, this showing actually supports Strife's ranking, given what I said earlier regarding Wolf's hand tier scaling. Next, we have Darth Talon, who, for reasons, is easily the most iconic member of the One Sith outside of Darth Krayt himself. And depending on the possible trajectory of recent media, even that distinction might not be true for much longer. Despite being the youngest of the Hands, Talon is stated to be one of the most formidable lightsaber duelists in her order, with Malady implying that her force strength was recognized as hand tier from the get-go. Speaking of her ethereal abilities, Talon's mastery of force concealment is consistently portrayed as exceptional even amongst her class, allowing her to project false impressions of herself convincing enough to deceive Jedi Masters. During the One Sith's journey to Had Abaddon, Talon told Strife she would carve out his heart along with her own if Krayt commanded it. While we never see her act on this threat, I believe she'd succeed. This is because Talon consistently outperforms Strife in combat against Cade Skywalker and Wolf Sazin, having actually beaten Sazin on one occasion, whereas Strife's best result was a double KO. Darth Nihil is another prominent EU Dark Lord whose lore and feats speak for themselves. He is stated to be Krayt's top enforcer both within and outside the Order, the greatest Nagi hunter, period, and a fearsome opponent on the battlefield, having led the Sith's attack on the Ossus Jedi Temple. It was during this campaign that the Hand slew Grandmaster Cole Skywalker. A fact he won't let you forget. Cole was running on fumes and was unexpectedly blasted in the back, but it's still notable that Nihil's Force Lightning was potent enough to kill someone who, at their peak, was the strongest Legacy-era Jedi. His telekinesis was also powerful enough to choke an enraged Cade Skywalker, albeit through another surprise attack. Just as I ranked Talon above Strife for her superior showings against Wolf Sazin and Cade Skywalker, I rank Nihil above Talon for the same reasons. His victories over Wolf were quicker and decidedly more brutal, and he was able to actually fight and damage End of Volume 3 Cade, whereas Talon was one-shotted. Nihil was also selected by Weirlock to track down the Twi'lek Sith after she stole Krayt's body, despite Strife being on hand. The Nagi succeeded in his mission, and while we only see the conclusion of his duel with Talon, he did appear to be winning before the newly reborn Krayt intervened. The final notch in Darth Talon's superiority over those ranked below him was his elevation to leader of the One Sith in the wake of the War Arc, a massive lore buff given the competitive nature of dark side hierarchies. Next in A tier, we have Swarm War Lomi Plo and Darth Weirlock III. These are the highest echelon Darksiders of the One Sith Order, who only fall short of the throne because someone else is already sitting in it. Now, in terms of power scaling, Lomi Plo is complicated. While I do think A tier is the most logical placement for her, I just want to say right off the bat that there is a legitimate argument for her being as low as B tier, depending on how you interpret certain sources. Lomi Plo started off as a Night Sister, but was a fully fledged member of the One Sith by the time of the Yuuzhan Vong War. After crash landing somewhere in the unknown regions, Lomi and her companion Welk were assimilated into a Killik nest, an ancient insectoid species with extraordinary telepathic abilities. This merger proved disastrous, as their dark side alignment gradually twisted the Killik nest into the Gorag nest, a hive-mind bent on domination. Lomi Plo was transformed into the Unseen Queen, gaining both an insectoid-enhanced body and an absolutely gargantuan power boost, as the collective life forces of the entire nest was funneled into her. In this new form, Plo is stated to possess an incredible connection to the dark side of the Force, with her concealment abilities buffed to the point where she could hide her activities from even Grandmaster Luke Skywalker. During the Swarm War, the Dark Queen defeated Pre-Prime Jacen Solo and Pre-Prime Mara Jade with assistance from her Killik guards, and fought Luke Skywalker on multiple occasions, going toe-to-toe with him in most encounters, but ultimately being killed during their final battle over Tenupe. For reference, Luke at this point was significantly stronger than he had been during the Jedi Academy trilogy, where he is confirmed to have surpassed the Leia-amped version of himself from Dark Empire 1, who defeated Prime Darth Sidious. However, this is where things get complicated. You see, Lomi Plo's signature Force ability allowed her to feed upon and magnify a target's internal doubts. Under normal circumstances, this is something Luke could have handled. However, the Dark Nest trilogy just so happened to coincide with the period in which he learned the full truth of what happened between his parents. Needless to say, this gave the Dark Queen plenty to work with. By exploiting Luke's emotional turmoil, Lomi was able to crank the Jedi Master's confliction up to 100, which nerfed him considerably. It is only when Skywalker is able to overcome his doubts that he is able to defeat Lomi, which he does relatively quickly. Again, this is what makes Lomi Plo's scaling complicated. The stronger or weaker you make Luke during Dark Nest, the stronger or weaker she becomes by extension. What we can say for certain is that an unencumbered Swarm War Luke Skywalker is stronger than Lomi Plo, since he did beat her, while his nerfed self admits that he would likely lose in a direct struggle of power. This dynamic also demonstrates why Lomi is not on Crate's level, since he scales to a much stronger version of Luke, which we'll get to shortly. Even so, her ability to take on Pre-Prime Jacen and Mara should at the very least put the Unseen Queen in the mid-NJO Council ranges of strength, which is not a tier I believe Strife or Talon ever achieved, with Nihil maybe scraping it. Next, we have Darth Weirlock III, whose ranking is significantly easier to justify. He is repeatedly stated to be the second strongest One Sith, which places him well above the Emperor's hands. He is also stated to be one of the galaxy's foremost scholars of Force traditions, a master of Sith ritual lore, and a master-level practitioner of sorcery, all of which align with his title of Sith Lore Master. His lightning could quote-unquote kill Vector Arc Crate, his Tuta Minis could easily dispel blasts from Darth and Dedu, and his illusions could drive Force users insane en masse. The third in a line of regents, Weirlock served as Crate's closest confidant and advisor in both physical and spiritual matters. Although some like to downplay him with the assertion that his position was just inherited and not earned, not only does that make zero sense for how the Sith operate, but it blatantly contradicts the statements of Weirlock being second only to Crate, which is backed up by the Lore Master's feats. During a mission to Praketh, Darth Weirlock confronted the ancient Sith Lord Darth Endedu after one of his followers restored his body and reawakened the spirit contained within his holocron. Though initially rattled by Endedu's psychological warfare, once Weirlock psyched himself back into combat readiness, Endedu was stomped in short order, his spirit obliterated and his tomb resealed. Pretty fucking impressive considering that Endedu is frequently portrayed as being in the upper echelons of the ancient Sith. There's even an argument to be made that Weirlock was actually stronger than Vector Arc Crate, given the severity of the Emperor's degradation, and the fact that the writers went out of their way to exclude him from the Battle of Had Abaddon. That said, this is purely speculation on my part, and probably not true since Crate still has Supreme Grade statements attributed to him during that storyline. Darth Weirlock would later battle the resurrected Darth Crate at the beginning of the war arc within the throne room of the Sith Temple. Although Crate was holding back in this fight just to flex how the Lore Master didn't have it, the fact that he could offer any resistance. The fact that this was even remotely a contest truly highlights the kind of monster Weirlock was, since this was Darth Krayt at his peak. The same peak Krayt who humbled Darth Nihil in the previous issue. Before we move on, this is the tier where I believe it makes the most sense to place Sarai at her hypothetical full potential, given the multitude of statements of her being similarly talented to her father. As for Weirlocks 1 and 2, we don't have much to go on, however, I'd say they'd more than likely rank somewhere on this tier as well. Finally, in S tier, surprising absolutely nobody, we have Emperor Darth Krayt, the founder and leader of the One Sith Order. He is constantly cited as the strongest One Sith, with his telekinetic and force lightning abilities stated to far outstrip those of any Sith of his era, which means he auto-upscales from any TK or lightning feats demonstrated by those ranked below him. His mental powers were sufficient to simultaneously touch the minds of every full or partial Darksider in the galaxy, and he remains the only Sith Lord to have successfully employed Force Drain against one of the Ones. I could honestly end the video there, but let's keep going. During the events of Fate of the Jedi, Darth Krayt was stated to be Luke Skywalker's Darkside equivalent, with the two ultimately joining forces to fight Abeloth in the realm beyond shadows. While you can make the case that Luke performed a bit better against Abeloth than Krayt did, the two were still portrayed as relative in strength, with both managing to damage the Chaos Bringer at various points in the battle. As mentioned earlier, this version of Luke was significantly stronger than the one who killed Lomi Plo, and many levels beyond the Luke who bested Prime Darth Sidious. Yeah. Although Krayt remained supreme within his order, his power level would take a massive nosedive throughout the first 6 volumes of Legacy due to his Vong Coral Seed illness. He is even stated to have been weaker than Karnas Mur at the time of the Vector arc, a Sith spirit who rivaled the likes of Marka Ragnos and Frida Nad. Fortunately for the Emperor, Krayt would come back better than ever in the wake of his resurrection, using his new dark transfer technique to purge the Vong infestation from his body and fully revitalize his connection to the dark side. While it has been debated whether or not reborn Krayt was outright more powerful than he had ever been, or he had simply rewound himself back to his Fate of the Jedi level, Jan Dursema does describe him as being at his peak, and understanding his powers better than ever before. You add the extra decades of combat experience, Shatterpoint, and Dark Transfer on top of that, and I think it's safe to conclude that Reborn Krayt scales above his FOTJ self, even if the gap isn't enormous. Though, even that's debatable. During the events of Legacy War, Darth Krayt killed Darth Weirlock without going all out, and battled Cade Skywalker one last time within the Sith Temple. Cade fought well, but ultimately folded under the Emperor's new strength, only managing to kill Krayt after the Dark Lord lowered his guard under the belief that the young Jedi had finally embraced the dark side. A mistake ironically similar to the one Sidious made over a century ago aboard the second Death Star. Cade then went so far as to launch the Dreadlord's body into the sun to ensure there would be no more resurrections, which speaks to the terror and respect the Dragon of the Sith commanded even in death. All in all, Darth Krayt is, without question, the most powerful member of the One Sith Order, and has a legitimate claim for being the most powerful Sith Lord in the entire Star Wars franchise, with Darth Caedus and maybe Sarasu Talon being his only real competition for that title if we're being brutally honest. What is it about being born on Tatooine that brings out both the absolute best and the absolute worst the universe has to offer? Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown and ranking of the One Sith Order. As always, leave any thoughts or questions in the comments section below. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.